Yo, what's up, everyone? Today, we're going to talk about Castlevania, specifically Castlevania 1. Now, I love Castlevania. I think the series is probably one of the best video game series ever. I definitely, like a lot of other people, probably enjoy and appreciate it more than Konami executives seem to appreciate it. But hey, future could still hold something. Konami's doing a lot nowadays, compared to what they've been doing the past couple of years. I don't know, maybe something's going to happen. For now, the Bloodstained stuff still exists. So it's filling the hole, the Castlevania-sized hole in my heart at the moment, so we're just going to have to go with that. So, anyways, I talk a lot about ports. I talk a lot about weird ports, but still, I'd say ambitious and or good ports. I don't like to be negative, but I do like to cover things that are interesting to me, and I think this is the first time I'm going to be covering something where I'm not going to be, heaping a bunch of praise on it. Now, like I said, I'm not one to be negative about something. I'm not going to be overly critical. However, with it being so questionable, I think it generates some sort of curiosity in me to really try to dig through this port and see what I can find with it. So, what we're talking about today specifically is the DOS port of Castlevania 1. So, let's start this off with a bit of history so we can kick this thing off right. So, Castlevania was first released in '96 in Japan, specifically the Famicom Disk System version, which is probably my preferred version. I like the saving and I like floppy disk. I'm obsessed with floppy disk. I don't know why. Maybe I'll make a video about the technology at some point. But it was released in '86, and then, in America, we got the cartridge version in '87, and the DOS port is from 1990, so it was a bit late. And, when you're looking at it, Castlevania itself was already a little bit late into this kind of life cycle, because not long after, we got the PC Engine, or TurboGrafx 16, however you want to call that. And what I'm trying to do is frame the time period in which this port would have come out. So this port came out in '90, like I said, on DOS systems. And at that point, like I said, PC Engine was already out, the Genesis was already out, and the Super Nintendo was just going to get launched. If not a little bit after this port came out, I'd have to check the months again. But that's the time period we're working with. So, we have already 16-bit hardware, or hardware that's close enough to being 16-bit out. That's kind of the general time frame we're in hardware-wise. So just keep that in mind as we're looking at this port, because it's definitely going to paint it in a bit of a worse light, but I want you to be aware of what was going on during the time period. So while I'm setting everything up here, we're going to be looking at the NES version playing in the background, just so it's fresh in your head what it looks like. Now, it's not strictly from my NES or Famicom using real hardware. I happen to already have footage of this Konami collection on PC that's strictly NES emulation, and it was bizarre. It's from 2002 or 3 or something like that. But it is just NES emulation, so you'll get a very good baseline of what Castlevania normally is like. And now this is a very famous game series and stuff. You probably already know what Castlevania looks like, but if you're not going back to it constantly, maybe it's a little hazy for you. So, Castlevania controls great, it looks great, the music's incredible. All these things come together to make Castlevania what it is. It's a phenomenally polished game and a really good first effort for a series. I don't need to tell you how good Castlevania is, but I'm still going to tell you how good Castlevania is. So, obviously, Konami probably wants Castlevania ported to other pieces of hardware, and they did do this. There's an MSX port, which I've never personally looked at, but I have seen it. I would like to dive into it at some point. It's a port in the loosest sense of the term. They changed a lot in the MSX port. There's some different progression. I want to say there's non-linear level structures and stuff. It honestly looks really cool. I heard it doesn't play good, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to check it out. A little later after this, there was the Sharp X86000. I hope I got the number right. Port that was later reworked into Castlevania Chronicles on the PS1. That port is super good. I would love to get my hands on the Sharp X86 100 whatever hardware, just so I could play this on like real hardware at some point. But that was like a PC sort of thing, so I would need to get like a compatible monitor and stuff if I truly wanted to play it the way it was intended. I don't foresee that honestly ever happening with the prices of some of those machines, but I'll tell you, it's on my bucket list. I want to play like the original version of that, not just the Chronicles version. But yeah, Castlevania's been around. It was, ported a bunch of later on too. There's the modern collection you can get on like PC, Switch, Xbox, PS4 stuff. That all has like NES Castlevania. So Castlevania has been ported a lot, but in the 90s, not maybe not as much, but it was still getting around. So that's where the DOS port comes in. Now, here's where things get a little tricky, okay? So, obviously, what I like to do is get as much reasonable information that's interesting to listen to together before I start recording and kind of take notes and go through talking points. But the thing is, it's really hard to get information about this DOS port. Most of what I'm looking up, at first I'm getting Dawn of Sorrow stuff because I'm typing in Castlevania DOS. That's not helpful. I'm like, okay, Castlevania DOS 1990. I'm still only finding like copies of the game, totally legit copies. You know what I'm saying? That's not helping me. There's one article on the Castlevania wiki about this, and it's the shortest article in existence. And I don't blame them. There's hardly any info about them. Some of the links of sources are dead links. I looked through them through like cache websites, but or cached websites, I should say. But there's still, it's more like trivia, like, hey, the DOS version exists, and it's weird. It's like, it doesn't tell me much about the game itself. So, here's what I can tell you. It was ported by this company known as Distinctive Software Incorporated that later got bought out by EA, and then that branch was like EA Vancouver, which was in charge of some reasonable stuff. I'm not big into EA's games or anything like that, but they went on later to make some like okay stuff under a different branch, but I don't really even want to count that because that's more stuff from the future and with different hardware and ports and stuff going on. I more so would want to talk about the original company as Distinctive Software Incorporated actually was and what ports they actually did do. Now, before looking into this and starting this video and stuff, I've never heard of this company before. Now, granted, I've only been in the DOS space for maybe like 2 years max. Like, I've never been super interested in DOS ports or anything like that, or DOS gaming. That's more so something that's been a curiosity of mine, like I said, like maybe the past 2 years or so. Just, I grew up a lot with consoles and older consoles, and even PC gaming wasn't something that really came to me till later on. Now, like, I love all this stuff, and I think some of the DOS ports are absolutely fascinating. Not all of them are bad, like, and now this was like a couple years after, but I think like the Mortal Kombat DOS ports are actually like quite impressive and stuff. Like, the controls are a little iffy, which isn't good for a fighting game, but it's not like, considering some of the other ports at the time, they're pretty impressive. Now, I'm not trying to go on a tangent about DOS ports. I'm just saying, like, if you're not familiar with how DOS gaming was back then, I don't assume that it's all bad just because of this port. I actually think some of it was fairly impressive. So what this company has done is a lot of work in the PC space back then, like DOS ports, Atari ST, Macintosh, Amiga, Commodore 64. They were all over the place. Now, this company got their hands on some pretty high-profile ports at the times, or at least rights to port games. They did 3 ports of Altered Beast, one on the Amiga, Commodore 64, and DOS. They got their hands on Castlevania, obviously, and they also did a Commodore 64 port of Castlevania, which, we'll save that for another video. They got, they got Metal Gear for the Commodore 64. They got Outrun for Commodore 64 and DOS. So, they got some pretty important stuff going on. I can't speak to the quality of much of their stuff. I've seen some screenshots of some of these other ports and stuff, and a little bit of gameplay, and I can't say it's, like, overly impressive. However, what I can say is that I don't know how critical I can be, because judging by, like, the opening credits in the Castlevania 1 port, it seems like there was literally, like, 5 or 6 people, maybe, like, if I'm remembering right, like 5 or 6 people that worked on these ports. It's just that's a very, very, very small number, and I don't know what their budget was, what their time frame was, what their target PC hardware really was at the time, because that can mean so many things as well. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to be like overly harsh for no reason. I'm really trying to be like objective about what I think about this port and what went into it. So, with all that out of the way, let's start actually talking about the DOS port of Castlevania. So, one of the first things you'll notice is that Simon doesn't look the same, which I don't necessarily understand what was going on, because a lot of the sprites look like they were literally ripped from the NES version, like the backgrounds, the enemies, and maybe my memory was a bit fuzzy while I was playing this, but to me it looked pretty much identical except for Simon. So I have a couple of theories on this. I can't give you much concrete information besides literally what I just told you, because there is like little to no information about this online. Honestly, like, if you know anything that I don't, let me know about it, because there's like I said, there's hardly any info about this online. And Castlevania is such a big series, like, but this is also from a time period where these ports probably really just weren't getting the attention as the normal console ports and stuff, even though Castlevania is such a huge series. Anyways, Simon looks a little sickly. I think that's the best way I could describe it. What my guess would be is that maybe they had a higher color depth that they could use on this DOS port compared to the Famicom and NES version, where Simon is like 2 colors. Maybe there's another shade in there, but Simon doesn't have many colors in his NES Famicom sprite. However, I don't know if it's just because at this point that sprite work is like so iconic that I don't see it as bad, or maybe it isn't as detailed as it could have been. I'm not quite sure. It's so hard to talk with certainty about stuff that's become kind of like legendary and like an icon of a generation. That's the best way I can describe it. Like, I don't know if I had no attachment to Castlevania and it wasn't a big series, if I would objectively look at each Simon sprite, one from the DOS port, one from the NES version, and be like, yes, the NES version is just like objectively better, because like I in a way it's not. It's less detailed and there's less colors. However, I just kind of think it works better, and I think it fits more into the other color choices and stuff of the game, and the background's better. I just think it blends together much better. There's definitely more colors to Simon in the DOS port, and there's more like... I'm colorblind, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get these colors right, but it looks like he has some like yellow or something like on his torso too that's definitely like not... It looks like it's an additional part of his clothing that's not really there in the NES version. I'm not sure, to be honest, but there's more colors. The sprite work's definitely worse for him, I think, though. Like, the more colors doesn't really make up for it. So, something you have no doubt noticed by now is this game runs at, like, 1/4 of the frame rate of the NES and Famicom versions. So, this is gonna be the biggest drawback of this port, and there's no nice way of saying this. This is, like, game-breakingly bad, and I'm, like, if you've seen anything else on my channel, I am not overly critical of anything. I really feel like I tend to see the good in even shoddier ports and stuff like that. I just find porting software and stuff to different pieces of hardware really fascinating. I really give, like, developers and stuff the benefit of the doubt, but this has, like, a huge playability problem. It's not just like, oh, it's like half the frame rate, maybe this would be kind of acceptable. It's not like this was the original version of Castlevania and then a later version was like twice as many frames and stuff. This is a 4-year-old port of an already existing and well-playing game. I feel like just even playtesting this, I don't think I personally feel comfortable with, even at the time, saying that this was acceptable. And I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm really not. But it is so sluggish to the point where it's actually, like, hard to play. Now, when I started out playing this, My intention was I was just going to play until I run out of lives, and I was expecting to maybe get to the second stage. When I talk about things, I really want all the context I could possibly get. Context. However, there is only so much of this I thought I'd really be able to stomach. I got farther than I thought I did, though. I feel like I can talk with certainty about this port for the most part. I got, like I said, I got way farther, like 5th stage or something. I'm not counting, like, the subsection of stages, but I count, like, stage 10 and 11 and 12. I mean, like, I got to, like, the 5th actual stage, I believe. Much farther than I thought I was going to get. And I'll be honest, like, I don't see any normal person sitting down and trying to get even as far as I did. Like, I don't know why you would want to waste your time, to be honest. Normally, I'm always one that says, like, when I'm talking about any port, like, hey, what I want you to do, what I want you to take away from this video is to go play this port, check it out yourself, and just experience it. I don't think I need to tell you to go experience this. However, you know, just to check out something that's questionable, like, I'd say go ahead, but don't feel bad if you don't feel like sticking around for more than level 1. Like, I don't blame you. So, yeah, there's like a fourth of the amount of frames actually going on. Everything's really choppy, really jittery. Now, I know DOS games for a while had problems with scrolling, so I'm not really gonna hold that against it. I feel like the actual scrolling of the level, like, while it's super choppy, is not necessarily like a deal breaker for me. The problem is, like, all the enemies and Simon himself have, like I said, like a fourth of the frames of animation, and the problem is it feels like that's how the inputs are too. It actually feels like this thing's running at, like, I'm not trying to exaggerate, like, if I had to say this was like in a 60 hertz container, this thing feels like it's running at 15 frames per second, and I feel like my inputs are going in like a fourth of how much I actually want them to go through. So the game is really difficult to control and play, and like I said, like, I gotta pat myself on the back. I don't even know how I made it as far as I did, because this is that bad to play. I would say, from the little bit I saw beforehand, it's worse to play than it looks. I don't know how that's possible, but it really, honestly, genuinely is. There is no such thing as reacting to something. It's more of, I've played Castlevania enough to know when stuff's gonna come, like, relatively speaking. I'm not, like, an expert at Castlevania, but I knew enough of the maps and enough of the enemy layout to kind of preemptively plan things, but even that could only go so far. Like, with the little, like, flea men dudes, like, if they start jumping around you and you didn't, like, preemptively try to plan out a whip attack to get rid of them, good luck. Good luck, because you have, like, no control over this. They're being all jittery all over the screen and stuff like that. It's really hard to react to things, and it kind of, like, a lot of the boss fights and stuff came down to me just mashing the attack button and just kind of hoping I wasn't going to die. There was very rarely a chance where I felt like I could actually do something kind of technical or planned out, like jump and throw a sub-weapon. Even that, like, I'm not even trying to be funny, like, even that is really difficult to try to do. And there is no way that you're going to be in a boss fight and you're going to plan to, like, jump forward and throw, like, an axe. I'm not trying to be funny. It's really funny, don't get me wrong, but that really, that's not going to happen. The controls are horrific as far as response time, and what I should also talk about is the actual controls of this. So, let me preface this with saying, this game does have a joystick option. However, I was having trouble getting that to work properly without it just holding, like, forward. So I couldn't really play with a controller properly. And I also, like, that's kind of not how I wanted to experience this, because I don't know how common it would have been for, like a PC gamer back in the day to even have a joystick. Maybe that was more popular than I'm realizing, but I figured the most authentic way to experience this would have just been, like, keyboard. So I'm going with the default keyboard bindings, and that's how I, like, actually sat down and played through the game. I literally, like, even by the time I was on, like, the 4th stage, I still kept getting jump and attack confused, and it was... I'm usually not like that. Like, I play every console going back to the Famicom, and I never get confused as to like what button I need to press to do something, even if I'm like changing up controllers all the time. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's, I also don't play much with my keyboard itself, so maybe that's a little on me. However, so use the arrow keys to move, which already I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, I feel like it should be like WASD. I feel like that's kind of the standard, but this was 1990. I don't know. So use the arrow keys to move, use space to attack, and then use enter to jump. And so obviously if you want to do like like a jump and then throw like an axe, you need to like hit enter and then up and space and stuff. So what I want you to do, if you're like watching this on your computer or something, like put your hands out on the keyboard and just think about what I just said. Think about the layout of using your right hand for movement, and then like space not for jump, for like attack, and then enter for jumping. And then I also want you to think about the fact that I said this, you each your inputs about a third of the time, or well, about like 3/4 of the time. So it genuinely is hard to jump and throw a sub weapon. I'm not kidding. Like, seriously, go try it out yourself. You'll see what I mean. I kept thinking like space should be jump and enter should be attack, and honestly, what it really should have been is like WASD to move, and then maybe space for jump, and then like enter for attack if we're gonna do it like that. I still don't think that's what I would like. I think I would like something a little more uniform next to like WASD for like jump and attack that's not different sized buttons, maybe just like J and K or something like that. I'm not quite sure how I do that. I'm just kind of thinking about how it's laid out on like a Famicom controller or something. So enter and space being like the reverse of what in my head I think it should be is really bad, and I didn't remap it. I'm not going to remap anything because I'm trying to experience this how people would have actually experienced this when they bought it in the 90s. I feel pretty bad for anybody that actually spent their money on this. Especially if you're like at a friend's house, they had Castlevania, and you're like, wow, this game's cool. I only have a PC at home, but there's this port of it out. Let me go buy that, and I can have the same experience at my house. That would suck. That would suck a lot. I can't even lie about that. That would suck so hard. So controls are very bad, but you may be asking, I didn't talk about one of the most important aspects of Castlevania that I mentioned earlier: the music, the sound design. Castlevania has some of the best music, like, literally ever. And like, not just from the later games, but even, I'd say, Castlevania 1 soundtrack is, like, incredible. So, how's the music in the DOSBoard? Now, let's again set this up properly. So, a lot of PC games back in the day, there's different sound drivers and sound synthesizers and stuff that you can run them through. I'm just running everything default, just how the game is set up when you boot it up. So maybe there's some sort of sound card or whatever type of thing I could run it through. I'm making it sound like I don't know about computers. It's just I didn't have a computer in the 90s. And I know some of the sound synthesizing technology isn't literally a sound card. It's not quite the same thing from my understanding. So my language with that is murky, but point being, there's different like sound fonts that you can run these through. Like let's say like you're playing a PS1 game, you're playing Final Fantasy VII, and for whatever reason you could choose like a different MIDI sound font to run the soundtrack through. It'd be like that kind of a choice. So I'm just running with whatever default sound drivers and everything as the game boots up. So the music's really bad. The music itself, you could still kind of tell that it's like Castlevania music, and I think in my head I'm just kind of filling out what the soundtrack would sound with all the instrumentation, because it's missing like all of the low-end instruments, like entirely. Like it's just like an upper melody of everything, and that's it. Which it makes it sound very empty in comparison, but like maybe, like I said, if I never played the NES version, I would think it's like okay. But the problem is, even if it was just like you're getting like half the instrumentation, every time you attack, literally every time you attack, the music cuts out. I'm again, I feel like I keep having to say I'm not kidding and I'm not trying to be funny, because it really is just like that. So, if you attack, like, an enemy or something, and you hit them, it gives you, like, a confirmation sound like you did it right, and it cuts out the music while it does that. That's a really bold sound design choice, I'd say. So that's one thing. Alright. Well, what about when you miss an attack? It plays like an error sound. Like, you missed the attack, and it wants to give you that kind of feedback that you missed an attack. So every time you attack, and you attack a lot in Castlevania, you really do. Or just hit, like, candles and stuff like that to get items out of them. Every time you do, the music stops. And it almost seems like it stops and then picks back up from where it left off. It's jarring. It's very confusing. My guess is that they can only run like one sound channel at a time, and they wanted both sound effects and music. I don't know if this was the way to do it. I don't think I have a better idea besides this, honestly. Well, yes, I do. This should have been a choice. You should have had like 3 choices, like music, sound effects, or both, but having both be what's in the game where it cuts out every time. I don't know how many people would actually want to choose that option, but, like, the best way I could describe this is after playing for like a minute, it became like maddening. Like, it's like high-pitched noises too when you hit enemies, because they want you to know that you're doing a good job hitting enemies, but it felt like it was driving me nuts. And what's the worst thing about this, with the music, the gameplay, the presentation, all of this, the presentation's kind of okay, I suppose, but not the frame rate, I mean, is like, somewhere along the line, I started to enjoy this, and I don't understand why, and I think it's just because in the root of it all, in the just the DNA of the sport, it's still Castlevania 1. And I still think Castlevania 1 is probably one of the greatest games of all time. And some twisted part of me was starting to kind of enjoy this port. I don't know if that's a testament to the quality of the port, if it says something about me and how I consume entertainment. I don't know what inference you want to make out of that. But I have to be honest, I started enjoying the game. Granted, when I finally ran out of all my lice, I will say, I was like, alright, like, thank God that happened. I'm kind of done with this now. But there is some shred of enjoyment and curiosity that you could obtain from this port. So, I feel like I've said what I wanted to say about this. If this was really like 5 or 6 people, and I don't know what target PC they were kind of going for, then maybe this was okay. But I feel like I'm being very generous with that. I don't want to dog on some sort of like rookie programmers that were just trying their best for weak hardware or something, or having no source code or anything. I think they did though, because the sprite work looks very similar besides Simon. So I'm not going to be mean to people that maybe made a bad port. That's not how I am. I'm sure they tried their best and all that. But yeah, as far as the port itself, this is honestly probably one of the worst ports I've ever seen. Yet somehow I still found myself getting some sort of enjoyment out of it. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was genuinely fun to look at this port, because this is one Castlevania 1 port I actually wasn't aware of before. Like I said, I knew about the Sharp X8600 or whatever port. I knew about the MSX port, but I've actually never heard about this port before until very recently. So this was a lot of fun to attempt to research, even though I really couldn't. My research was more like, I'm gonna play the game and tell you about the game, but, you know, it was still fun experiencing this janky mess. There's just not a nicer way of saying it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and, you know, if you have any experience with this port, let me know in the comments or whatever. That'd be really cool to hear about it. But that being said, that's going to be all for me today. Have a good one.